Please join me in welcoming Irvin Weathersby Jr., a newly appointed assistant professor. Congratulations in English.
Thank you.
Former high school teacher who has worked in Baltimore, the Bronx, and Harlem. He teaches creative writing here at Queensborough and in the MFA program at City College. Is that still correct?
That is correct.
Okay, very good. His writing has been featured in Esquire, The Atlantic, The Root, Killens Review, and EBONY. He has received awards and fellowships from the Voices of Our Nation's Art Foundation, the Research Foundation of CUNY, Bread Loaf's Writers Conference, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the Mellon Foundation. Released in early 2025, Weathersby's book, In Open Contempt, Confronting White Supremacy in Art and Public Spaces, was featured on ABC News, and you are fresh off of a national book tour.
I am.
And longlisted for the 2026 Penn John Kenneth Galbraith Award for Nonfiction. So I'm very happy to have you here. It's not like we haven't spoken before, but we're going to take a little turn.
Yeah. Thank you.
So before we get to the great news about your long listed for the book that you just released, I want to kind of take it back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with you. Even before you started teaching in college, talk a little bit about your time as a high school teacher, and I believe right out of undergrad.
Right out of undergrad. Oh man, it was really challenging. I will say, because I was only, I guess, roughly maybe like 22 years old or so. And my students, I was teaching high school, I was teaching seniors, and so some of them were 18, 19 years old. And it was awkward in terms of, the authority. I'm the authority in the room, but I'm not. Some of their siblings were older than me. But it was the hardest thing I've ever done. That first year of teaching was really, really challenging.
And what was the subject? Were you doing English literature?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was teaching English literature. I was teaching the debate club. And it was just really hard. Like, there's nothing that can prepare you for being a teacher outside of just doing it, being in the classroom. You can take a bunch of classes, you can read a bunch of theory, but that's not going to work, especially when you're talking about teaching in an urban environment, teaching in spaces where students are under-resourced. We didn't have textbooks to take home. It was really challenging, and I made it through, but it was the hardest thing that I've ever done. I've often say that I will return home and fall asleep, on my couch and wake up in the same clothes that I went to sleep in. I was just that exhausted every day, and just like, all right, I got to do this again. I got to get up and just try to do it. It was, yeah.
Given all those challenges, and even without those challenges, they talk about how hard it is to get students to read. How did you approach teaching literature amongst all of those challenges in that classroom?
The biggest thing that helped me was really trying to understand flexibility. I was coming in there with these rigid attitudes of like, this is what I want to teach, this is how I'm going to teach it, this is the lesson plan. And I started to kind of listen to my students and started to hear like, oh, okay, this isn't working. So let's try to figure out a point of entry into these texts that they can kind of relate to. I started reading texts that reflected more of their own experience, really tried to incorporate different modes of teaching. I brought in like hip hop and other kind of things local to Baltimore to kind of help them kind of engage. Most of the students had read or at least had heard of Edgar Allan Poe, but they didn't realize his connection to Baltimore. So we did a lot of those type of things and just really tried to encourage their love of reading through any text that they could kind of engage with, whether it was a graphic novel or a comic book, or even even the classics. So it was hard, but it's that trial by fire that I think you kind of have to learn.
And do you think that trained you for the next opportunity you found yourself in as the education coordinator? And that brought you to New York, correct?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I came to New York to go to school. So I went to the new school to get my MFA. And while I was doing that, I started teaching and working in the reentry space. But yeah, now today, I feel like I can teach with my eyes closed because of that experience.
The second one or both of them together?
Well, kind of both of them, really. It's just like, you get your 10,000 hours in, right? And you kind of master your craft. And so I understand when I walk into a classroom how to pivot, how to kind of engage, what questions to ask, how long to pause before students, need time to kind of reflect to answer the question. So These are all the things I just had no idea of, when I first started. And I actually wasn't trained in education. It was a very strange thing. And there's some programs that are still doing this, but I was getting a degree in education while I was actually teaching. And so it was like I was learning, but I was also learning, in the field. And so it was really challenging.
But that has to be a unique experience, because I would think in the classroom you got the theory, but then you're going out couple hours later for the practice to be able to actually challenge the theory if it works.
It's like, is this working? Yeah. Let's hear, like, how is this? I mean, look, there were some things that absolutely I was able to transfer in terms of some of the reading strategies and trying to, especially like rereading and trying to think about engagement. So yeah, but I came to New York first just to kind of go to graduate school, and then I started teaching.
Talk to me a little bit about being an education coordinator, specifically for the reentry program. How is that different from what you did as a high school teacher?
So in that job, when I was working in Harlem in the Bronx, I was teaching about the same age students as high school students, but their levels were way more severe. Their deficiencies were way more severe. So many of them had a rudimentary kind of understanding of reading. And so like they were reading at elementary school ages and doing math and calculations at that same age. And so many of those students had dropped out or really had checked out, by middle school. And so they struggled with reading paragraphs. They struggled with writing paragraphs. They struggled with their times tables. So it was really challenging. So when you think about that, you call that type of learning or those categories like adult basic education, because they were adults and we were kind of preparing them for their GEDs or their general education diplomas. And it was hard to kind of first look at people who were their age, 18, 19, 20-year-old people who really just struggled to kind of do basic or just had basic struggles with literacy. And so I had to kind of wrap my head around that and then understand like, oh, this is a part of the criminal justice system. This is why these young men and women were having issues with the criminal justice system, because they didn't have education and they had to figure out ways to kind of to make ends meet. And oftentimes they resorted to the underground economies. But yeah, so that's how it differed, and I had to meet them in different places. And when your levels are that low, getting a GED or getting up to speed in terms of high school level is going to take a year or two to kind of understand, like, okay, you go from times tables to trying to do calculus. That's a huge shift, or just like advanced algebra.
And I was thinking, you're coming from a background of, you have a love of literature and a love of reading. How much of a shift was it for you to take from teaching a love of reading to teaching reading so you can survive?
It's a big shift. I mean, I think there's a way in which, I still was trying to transfer that passion to them. And the shift was really like, the passion to be able to take care of yourself, to be self-sustaining, to fill out an application, right, to help your kids in school, to figure out like, well, what happens once I get this? Like, what are the doors that are going to open for me once I get this? And so that was the carrot, as it were, in terms of trying to get them motivated. It wasn't so much as like, oh, let's read this novel, for these kind of altruistic purposes or these critical thinking skills. And like, we'll get to that eventually, but that's not why we're here. Let's just try to figure out what are the practical skills that you need to kind of understand even your caseloads, right? Or like what you're facing in terms of when you're talking to a public defender, or you're talking to, the housing authority, all these people who are trying to kind of keep you, locked in certain spaces.
What year did you join Queensborough?
I joined Queensborough in 2009.
So 2009. So what was that like, starting here at Queensborough, coming from those varied experiences of the types of different kind of, I don't want to say categories, that sounds awful, but those specific teaching nuances you just described?
Well, honestly, it was really similar because a lot of our students are non-traditional, right? And so they vary in age, they vary in skill level. And I think having those experiences actually prepared me to be here at Queens, be at a community college, and meet people where they are. And so it was, I didn't feel like there was a big shift. It was like, oh, wow. I'm understanding these students that some of them are right out of high school, some not so much. Some need, some issues, some have some language issues in terms of trying to understand proficiency, which, other students had as well. I mean, I think in some ways, the students that I was serving or the people that I was serving in the reentry programs were very similar to language learners, right? They were starting at a very base level. And so, yeah, I felt prepared, honestly. It's like, oh, okay, I think I can do this.
So I wanted to talk specifically, and you're teaching here at Queensborough in creative writing.
Yeah.
What is your approach in getting the students to engage in creative writing?
One thing I love about creative writing is that you can do anything. There are no rules and there are a lot of rules. And let's just talk about how do we balance both of them. And so I think that we're all creative people. And so my job is to try to figure out what are the things that are going to trigger your imagination. And so I offer a bunch of different types of exercises, a bunch of different types of texts, so you can get a point of entry, so you can feel like, oh, I can do this, or I can kind of create this. I can, let my mind flow and wander and put something on the page. And so that's kind of one of my first approaches, really just exposing them to all of the things that can be, and then allowing them to kind of just throw it all on the page. And then, we do later on in the semester, usually we would figure out a way to kind of revise and workshop. Because writing is about rewriting, but the first step
I learned that the hard way.
Writing is about rewriting. So, but the first step is to kind of inspire them. And it's not me. I tell them it's not my job. I'm trying to show you with the texts that are going to speak to you, that are going to inspire you. And that's what writing is, right? And so I often talk about, creative writing or just writing in general, with an analogy of a musician, right? So, there's no musician who doesn't listen to music. That's impossible, right? So if you're going to make music, you got to listen to music. If you're going to create writing, you got to read some really good writing. And so you should always read more than you write. And so that is kind of the ethos and the energy that I try to create for the classes.
I'm curious, given your varied background and what you bring to the classroom now, is part of the experience also helping your students understand the value in their own stories? Absolutely.
I mean, I think that is it. So the goal of writing is, I tell students at the very beginning of every class, the goal of writing is to sound more like yourself. And so the more you do that, the more you'll be singular, the more you realize your singularity. And it's almost as unique, your imagination is as unique as your fingerprint. Your lens is uniquely yours. And so that is the goal. Okay, so how do we use the language? How do we use the lenses that you have? How do we use your perspective? All of the things that you know, all of the places that you've been, all of the people in your life. How do you pull from all of that to create something?
Do you find that hard for the students to see that there is value in that?
Initially, but not so much. I think once they start to kind of get it, it's like, oh, I guess I am different, because they know that they're different. There's a difference, but the goal is to continue to be like, okay, let's strip it back. Let's get rid of all of these cliches. Let's use the language let's use the words let's use all of the reference points that and let's bring that in. So that's the goal. Just how do you sound more like yourself? How do you tap into that inner monologue that is uniquely you?
So speaking of that inner monologue, I wanted to tap into something that you shared before. So no surprise, no gotcha. Something that you shared when you were trying to transfer from the University of New Orleans. You remember you were transferring to Morehouse College, and you shared that you had a conversation with the chair of the history department who was not going to take your A that you had in that history class. Just for the benefit of the conversation, can you go over what that history chair said to you? Yeah, so leaving
UNO in New Orleans and transferring to Morehouse, I had earned a bunch of A's. One in it was a survey class, and it was a history course, and it was history of Western civilization. That was the name of the course. And so I'm trying to transfer this, and the process with Morehouse, it might be the same today. But you had to meet with every chair, say, hey, okay, here's my transcript. What on my transcript is actually equivalent to what's here, so I don't have to take this again. And so I'm thinking that I'm going to enter Morehouse as a junior and just kind of accelerate my matriculation. And this man, he said, hey, look, I'm sorry, I can't really take this class, history, Western civilization. And I was really upset. I was like, well, why? He was like, well, look, here we teach world history, and the history of the world didn't start in Europe. And you have to take this again with the incoming freshman. And I was really pissed. And I was like, look, I earned this A. I learned everything I need to learn, like I'll tell you. And it took me a while. It took me some semesters, and really even after I left Morehouse, to appreciate, like, wow, he was right, and I remember that professor that I had in world history, and she was great. She was really, really incredible. And we started in Africa because that's where civilization began. And I remember even that moment, I was telling her, look, I want to read and write for a living. I'm not sure what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, but I know I want to write books. And she was like, yeah, I can see you doing that. I remember her saying that to me. And
so I brought that up because as you're talking about what you bring out in your classrooms, I'm curious what that experience has taught you about how you approach literature and writing in your classrooms with your students today.
I mean, it really opened up my eyes in terms of the levers of the canon and like who controls what we read and why and what's valued and what's not. And it makes me think, and when I look at my syllabi, I often say, okay, look, I know I teach in Queens. I know that I'm going to have every ethnicity represented. No one is really going to be dominant in my class. Like there's always going to be 2 of everything or 3 of everyone, and so like, how do I engage everyone? And so I make it a point to be like, all right, I need some Muslim authors. I need some women authors. I need some Caribbean authors, right? I need some Eastern European authors. I need some Latino authors. I need all of these people to kind of engage, everyone here in this class, because all our cultures are unique and interesting. And once we have these rich conversations, that's when we realize, oh, like we can create something that reflects who I am. And like writers have been doing that for millennia. And so now I can enter into that conversation as well.
So nerd here, and probably no surprise, one of my favorite parts of English classes was the discussion. And so I can imagine with that sort of philosophy that you bring to the class, the discussions must be very rich. And do you feel like you learn anything from having your students engage with the text as well?
I mean, I hope to. I tell them all the time, like, hey, look, I'm just a facilitator. Like, I know I'm up in the front. I know I'm the teacher. But, like, in order for this to work well, I have to learn from you. I will learn from you. And that's how it goes. Like, I often learn so much about not just Queens, but different cultures, different perspectives, different ways of being, whether it's, younger people or older people. It's fascinating. I mean, that's why I enjoy being a professor, because I get to learn something every day. And even if it's not for my students, I get to learn by trying to figure out ways in which to engage them, right? And so I don't do the same things all the time. And if I do, I'm trying to have a different approach to it, right? Because I'm trying to always thinking about what that means. And I think the mind of a professor or even a writer is always looking at the external stimuli and figuring out ways in which you could use that, whether it's for your classroom or whether it's for your own creative works.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's pick up there with your own creative work.
Yeah.
You've mentioned that you're passionate about writing and reading literature centered on marginalized communities, and your writing mostly focuses on race and the Black experience. Tell me what led you to that. I mean, outside of the fact you're a Black man. But seriously, what has led you to that?
Growing up in New Orleans, I grew up in a very kind of segregated space, right? And I didn't know the ways in which I was learning kind of culture and ways of being and Blackness until kind of I left kind of New Orleans and kind of had some distance from my family, but realized like that was always my lens. Like that was my experience for my family in terms of their engagement with white folks and their engagement with the larger world, with the white gaze. And I've always been kind of fascinated by those things. Like, I think it's a very strange thing when I say this, but it's true. But when I was in the 3rd grade, I won the citywide essay contest for writing something about Dr. King. And so like I feel like I've always been thinking about this. I've always been engaged with these questions about my own identity. And the deeper I learn, the more I kind of, ask questions, the more I realize, like, okay, this is the space that I want to inhabit, and this is what moves me. And I want to try to understand, how we have lived and where we can kind of go. And I even remember, even in the book, I talk about the first experience I had at Monticello, and looking at Thomas Jefferson's kind of home and plantation, and having a visceral response as a young elementary age kid. Like, wait a minute. Like, so you're telling me that my ancestors were owned by this guy who was called the president, and why? And so those initial experiences, I never stopped asking why. I never stopped trying to figure out, okay, how is this true? This is a lie, and this is a lie, and this is a lie. And so how do I kind of write, my way through this? How do I create some truths so that people, have a different experience, or at least can have a different experience?
And I know you've talked about the different things that have inspired your work, but I'd like to talk a little bit about what gravitated you towards the concepts that would ultimately become In Open Contempt.
There's so many, so it's interesting. There's so many points of entry that I realized that once I committed to the book, like, wait a second, I've been writing this book for a long time. There's things that I experienced in undergrad, I experienced as a youth, that I didn't know I was kind of writing this book or cataloging information for this book. But the simple answer is, in 2017, the then mayor of New Orleans, decided to remove 4 Confederate monuments. And I was in New York. I was actually preparing for my wedding. I got married in 2017. And it was just an incredible time. One, I'm entering into a new phase of my life, but also I'm thinking that America is entering into a new phase where it's like, wait a second, we're now going to actually confront white supremacy. We are going to address this. Like, there is a moment now within my lifetime. It almost was like that moment when Obama was elected, like, wow, this is happening. There's change that I can see. And so that was the first impetus. And I decided, you know what? I need to go home and feel this energy. I need to see what's going on in the city. I want to look at these monuments that were taken down and examine, their remnants. But I also want to look at the ones that are still up and kind of ask those questions. Well, why is this one still up? And who is this person? And so that led me really to travel all throughout the world, asking these same questions from New Orleans. And so I go throughout the South. I go to South Dakota, to a Native American reservation. I go to the Black Hills and Venice and Paris, to the Caribbean. And so I'm asking all of these same questions.
I love when you open the book, you do start in New Orleans. And I love how you talk about approaching one of the statues that remained with individuals who are upset that it's coming down. And they approach you as if you're there sort of to argue them about why it should come down.
Yeah.
With the release of the book and the tour, how have you approached those types of conversations, if they've come up since the book has been released?
I haven't had as charged a conversation like that the way the book opens. However, there have been a number of comments that have been posted online, whether it's on my Goodreads or other reviews. It was like, oh, you are a white supremacist. Like, so these people were giving me all these stars. It was like anti-white pretentiousness, or, this is all in your head. And it was like, oh, okay. So there's still people out there who still espouse those beliefs. And I think we don't have to look far in terms of see that those people are still out here engaging that. I'm fortunate enough to say that all the spaces that I've been to have been welcoming. Those spaces have been people who wanted to understand more about this, and these are very diverse audiences. I've spoken to primarily Native American audiences. I've spoken to primarily Black audiences, older audiences, younger audiences. It's been a wide array of people, and it's been really humbling, I think, to know that people are eager and hungry for this, and I can offer something to help them.
Have there been any shared themes that have sort of emerged with some of these different audiences around the content of the book?
Yeah, I think most people are often kind of alarmed by the things that they kind of walk by every day. They when they read this book, they're like, you made me kind of think about all of the monuments and memorials that are around me everywhere. And that was really one of my biggest goals, is like, I want people to kind of just open their eyes, maybe, you know, put their phones down and just like look around and ask yourself questions like, why is this here? Why is that over here? What does this say about my neighborhood? What does this say about, you know, the past? What does this say about the future? And that's one of the biggest things that most people are like, wow, you know, you really made me think differently about this. Often people also think differently about Mount Rushmore, some of the presidents, and start to question, like, I didn't know that. You know, I didn't know that, you know, that the man who sculpted Mount Rushmore was a Klansman, or he was closely, you know, associated with the Klan. He also sculpted Stone Mountain, which is the largest Confederate kind of memorial monument in the world, which is in Atlanta, Georgia.
At the time that you were working on the book, and even within the beginning of the tour, I don't think you anticipated, or maybe you did, that there would be this movement now of really looking at our historical markers, looking at our museums, not having information that may not be comfortable, but is still truthful.
Yeah.
How do you see your work in this space now with this movement of anything that's not making people feel comfortable should not be consumed?
I tell you what, I didn't forecast it all. I didn't know that it was going to be so destructive. And look, when I finished the book, when I actually like submitted it to my publisher, it was kind of the summer of 2024, and so the election hadn't been decided yet, and so this could have went one or two ways, right? We got Trump, or we could have went with Kamala, and obviously the country decided to make, in my opinion, the wrong decision. And, you know, the speed at which these things have happened, like attacking the Smithsonian, all of these things have been really, really bizarre. This whole notion that we should create monuments and days of remembrances for Charlie Kirk. It's maddening and it's mind blowing. And I think it's a part of their strategy, though. And I think, look, it's twofold. It is that they want to not address this. They don't want to face this, as if forgetting, you know, means it's going to be erased. Like this history is still living, it's still present. We are still, you know, reflections of what that past what has transpired in the past, and so they can't remove that, like, no matter what you do. But I'm still encouraged. I'm encouraged by things that are coming up, and even, you know, the most recent removal of plaques that were outlining or describing what slavery was in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. A judge that I saw yesterday said that no, those have to come back. You can't just take that down. You can't act as if this country wasn't founded on slavery like that. Like, I'm sorry, you know, no matter what, if we go to one state, right, we go to Florida or go to Texas or some other states, you know, they may not want to teach these truths, but I guess if I go to another state, that's true there, but it's true everywhere. And I think most people understand that, and I'm hopeful that we're going to come to a space where, look, history for all people is not all good, not all bad. And that's not the point. I think the point of history is to be able to kind of see the whole of humanity, and to kind of see, you know, the good, the bad, and figure out, like, what are the things that are going to help us move forward, right? And you can't whitewash history and think that you're going to arrive somewhere better. It just doesn't work that way. And I also recognize this is a mechanism of control. Right, you don't want people to critically think for many reasons, right? And so while you're destroying, you know, these monuments and memorials, or you're trying to, you know, hide history, you're also attacking governments, you know, in pursuit of oil, right? You're also really thinking about this imperialist project that is ongoing, which began with the transatlantic slave trade. And so I think, you know, they're very cognizant of the idea that there's a bright line from that period to today in terms of all of our, you know, imperialist desires, at least, and I say all of ours, or the administration's desires to.
Do you worry as an educator, as a professor, that there is some sort of restraint on what you can and cannot talk about it? And, I think of classes where so much of this conversation is a part of the natural discussion. Do you feel anything as an educator?
Honestly, I am actually grateful to be working at CUNY because CUNY has stood by its professors, stood by free expression, stood by these ideas. There's been some issues. There's with some adjuncts who have been removed, and I think there's still an ongoing case with one who is still trying to get their job back. But by and large, we have the license to kind of teach what we want and how we want. And I don't think, at least I don't know any professors, and I don't work in this way, where I have some sort of agenda to convert students to believe the way I believe. That's actually not the approach. It's the opposite. The idea is I want you to open your own mind and figure out your own lessons. My goal is really almost just like a coach. You got to play. Right. And I'm just trying to, give you the tools so you can figure out how you can live this life and how you can kind of maximize and reach your fullest potential. So, look, I'm grateful to be at CUNY and to feel protected and not be afraid to speak my mind. But, look, I think in the process of writing this book, and having white supremacy on the cover, there's a lot of things that I kind of just threw by the wayside. It's like, look, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say these things in this book, and that's how I feel.
And I think in a little bit of a pivot, I think the book, saying how you feel and standing by it has garnered you some awards, and it's garnered you some recognition. So there is an appetite.
There's an appetite.
There's an appetite to really dissect this information and to really look at it.
Yeah.
And as we talked about earlier, you were long listed for the Kenneth, I knew I was going to mess this up, Kenneth Galbraith Award for Nonfiction. What was your reaction to that? Did you expect that sort of?
I had spent, the year was great in terms of thinking about all the places that I had gone, all the communities that I had gone to. But honestly, there was a lot of disappointment in the lack of reviews that I didn't receive, the lack of kind of best of lists that I didn't make. And I had come to terms late in the fall with all right, my book is really, in your face. It's white supremacy on the cover. It's about a call for reparations. It's really attacking this moment. And I think sometimes people don't want to look at themselves when everything around us is forcing us to kind of grapple with our, existential kind of presence, And so when this came, I found out in December, I was really surprised. Like, wow, okay, like this. So, I had the luxury of my book came out in January to spend a whole calendar year looking at all the other books that have come out and all of the reviews that have come. And there was even a major newspaper who told us they were going to review it, said they did it, and at the last minute pulled it. And I know, at least I speculate that wasn't what the writer wanted, whoever reviewed that. That was someone else in control of these newspapers, and we see what's happened at the Washington Post, which now doesn't have a books section. Mm-hmm. Like that whole desk has been fired. And so there's no one reviewing books. And so that's where we are, because we have these oligarchs who are owning our media apparatuses. And so I was like, you know what? It's not about me. This is a larger conversation. And so when that came in December, I was really overjoyed. I was like, wow, okay, this did have some meaning to people. Mm-hmm. People did read it. My efforts were not in vain. And look, my editor told me and he's been in the business for a while, he was like, look, the climate in which this book has been produced may not necessarily yield the results that you want immediately, but it's going to live forever because you are saying some really timeless things here, and you're really asking some really important questions. So, just have faith that it's going to have legs. Mm-hmm. People will find it.
Have you taken a moment to celebrate yourself for this?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I believe in celebration. I believe, like, even in those moments of disappointment when I've had, I don't linger in those spaces, but I still want to honor the feeling. Like, it's okay to be disappointed, but now what do I do with that? How do I move forward? And I absolutely celebrate. I absolutely celebrate all the wins. There's been so many positive things that have happened. And so, yeah, no, I'm an optimistic person. I'd like to believe in the good of humanity, and that helps me kind of keep moving forward.
So I know you've had this amazing year, and we're talking about celebrating this long list, but is there anything next on the horizon? Is your brain percolating about something else that you'd love to do?
Yeah, it's too many times maybe I take a step back and realize like how far I've come. It's like, wow, like I can't believe like I'm really living the life that I want to live. And I tell this to my students all the time, like, hey, I know some of you are here for you just want to get a job, or at least I ask them that first, like, well, why are you here? Like, just like an open-ended question at the very beginning, like, what is it? And a lot of people say, I want to take care of myself. I want to be successful. I want to do this. I want to go there. And I just kind of probe and ask, like, what does that really mean? Do you know any successful people? Like, what is that? Is it money? Is it this? Is it that? And, a lot of them are like, look, I don't know many people who are happy in their jobs. And I was like, you know what? Now you do. Because I'm really fortunate to do what I do. I would do this for free. I'm just like, look, I'm happy they pay me, but this is something that I'm really passionate about. This is a lifelong journey, and I say a lot to say that I'm really just fortunate enough to know that I'm going to be writing forever. And so I have so many projects. I want to write everything, like all of my favorite authors, right? I want to write poems and fiction. I'm working on a novel now. I have some other nonfiction projects. I also want to create some art.
Really?
Yeah. And so another interesting thing about this book and just researching and thinking about art, most art is collaborative, right? And so I'm not saying that I'm going to be a studio painter. That's not what I mean, but I can do some conceptual art or some performance pieces, right? And thinking about like, okay, well, what if we put something like this here in this space? How would people respond to it? And the way you do that, many ways, is that you get artists, like whether they're students or other people, and you work together to devise this product, this thing that you want to create, and it's still yours. And learning how to kind of do these things, whether it's photography or film or all of these things. So I want to also create other forms of art. But the immediate horizon is a novel that I'm working on, and I'm excited
for that.
Yeah. It's based on some things I've experienced, but that's the immediate thing. But I'm still publishing some essays. I actually have a review that we'll be publishing here soon, about a book called a Biography of a Mountain, and it's about Mount Rushmore, and it came out in November, and it's a really fascinating book. A white man went to South Dakota, spoke to natives and non-natives, and really tried to understand what does this monument mean to our country, and he was inspired by Trump's 4th of July speech in 2020 at Mount Rushmore, when he was proclaiming like, hey, this is never going to be desecrated, this is never going to be removed, because that was the moment, as we remember, when a lot of these monuments and statues were coming down, and to really try to claim and this mythology of America, he Trump went there to kind of assure people that wouldn't change. And so this writer went there and said, what does this really mean? What is this? What does Mount Rushmore mean to our country? And so I did a review on that. And like I said, there's a bunch of other things that I've done, and people still reach out to me about reviewing shows or seeing other things. So
it's awesome. I love all that for you. Well, I know that's really good. And I know that it's really good for your students to see you in particular.
Yeah, it's not lost on me. Yeah, it's not lost on me. Not just me as a professor who is passionate, but also, look, many of my students have never had a black male professor, and I recognize that, and I embrace that. Yeah.
That's good. Well, congratulations on all of your success. I have loved having this conversation with you. Thank you for indulging me for a second time now for different reasons, but it's really been a good conversation. I'm so glad that you joined me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate
And I hope you will join us next time when we get to know someone else from Queensborough Community College.